Hello and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program episode 13 of my playthrough, and I am Shaarma if you haven't already guessed. Anyway, today we got a collection of 3 local missions around the Kerbal planet. This first mission we have our newly designed heavy lander, which we did send up to Ike, and we were planning to send to Juna, but unfortunately we didn't really have enough fuel to get us to Juna. Anyway, this rocket we're sending to the Mun. We've removed the docking struts for it, so the ship is a bit lighter, and we've loaded it up with all the science that it can take. Now, we're just doing this so that we can find one of the many plentiful biomes on the Mun, and we can just, collect as much science from this mission as possible. Anyway, you did notice that we were spinning around a bit earlier, and that's because there is a slight off balance with stages 3 and 4. No idea why that is, but it just causes the rocket to spin around, and really in the grand scheme of things that causes no worries for us. Now, I did raise the periapsis quite high up because we got plenty of delta V for this mission. So it's just a case of we get ourselves to a decent height, well over decent height rather, and we just get ourselves prepared to circularize. Now I was just getting myself and the solar panels opened up so that we made sure that we got plenty of electric charge to get to the Mun and back. Anyway, we've circularized our orbit and we're now officially in orbit, so it's just a case of finding ourselves a decent maneuver node to get in contact with the Moon. Now, this mission is entirely sped up, and so are the next 3 missions as well, just to make life a bit easier. And it turns out that the thrusting that we need to do at this stage is only about 600 meters per second. So I decide why not use some RCS just to make that rocket go that bit faster, because I left the RCS tanks on there in case of emergencies, and really they're only there for docking, at least on this designer spacecraft. So it's just a case of they were there, forgot to take them off, and may as well use them because they do actually benefit us. It makes the ship lighter when we use it, and it makes us go a bit faster when we use it. So, anyway, nearly got the perfect orbit, and voila, we have perfectly matched our scheduled node. So it's just a case of time warping all the way up until we get to a point where we can circularize around the Moon. So just flipping our ship around to the point that we need to get to burn, and voila, sped up. And once we reach our periapsis, we can throttle up. And it's just a case of circularizing, and voila, done. Now, we need to find a new biome, and I checked this before we set up on the mission. We have done the Midlands, which is a very broad area, so I decided that one of the better places to go for is actually one of the near polar craters, because each crater is a different biome. So I kind of figured, let's go for the one near the poles. That'll be a unique one. You can land there, get a load of science from it. So it's just a case of here I am actually fiddling about with the maneuver node to get us basically onto a polar orbit as opposed to an equatorial orbit. So just faffing around with maneuver nodes, throttling up, throttling down, making sure that we get to the point where we can actually land on the poles. And it's just a case of I'm fiddling around, and to be honest, it was a lot of fiddling, but we did get to the point that we need to be, and we have plenty of our fuel left because of that massive tank at the end of our ship. So, you know, in the grand scheme of things, it could have been a lot worse. But I over-designed this ship, so we got plenty of fuel and just flim-flamming about a bit and setting up a maneuver node to land us directly down near the center of that crater, which is wonderful. So just time warping up, and now it's a case of burning retrograde. And we have pretty much got our point. And yep, just getting myself prepared. And I decided that that point there is where I'm going to do my absolute stopping to cut all lateral thrust and whatnot. So, you know, throttling down now, killing all my velocity so that we basically fall like a rock. And it makes it easier for us to work out how much thrust we need to cancel our vertical velocity, because we don't have to worry about any additional sideways. And that's me ditching that tank, which is now empty, and it also serves as a really good marker for where the actual ground level is, because we're not quite sure what the elevation is, because it's all done relative to a sea level, the height gauge. So sometimes you can be a bit above sea level and you won't know. So I'm using that as a, well, that part that we just jettisoned as a gauge to see whereabouts the ground is, and I managed to work it out at about 1.5 kilometers, give or take, which was pretty accurate, to be honest, because it's just under that. Anyway, we land down, collect all the signs that we can, and plant a flag, take a surface sample, and we go back up into the rocket. Now we've got double the equipment on there, which means that we can take double the science. Now, I'm going to be doing a repeat of what we did on our first Minmus mission, which was fly over to a new biome once we've gotten all the science from that first place. So I decided that the best place to head to is the poles, because that's the nearest biome from the one that we're currently in. So I just decided to do a near crater science check with one of the mystery goos, because we've got 3 of those as opposed to 2. So, you know, it makes sense to get that while we can. Anyway, what suddenly concerned me the most about this biome is how bloody mountainous it was, because I'd never been to the poles on the moon before, and I wasn't quite aware of how mountainous it was, and that actually got me shitting massive bricks, because I thought we were just going to crash into the side of a mountain. But fortunately I managed to find a nice spot here which looked fairly flat, or at least deceptively flat compared to the rest of the area. And I'm just going to let you guys see what happens. It's just a case of, I use a bit of RCS as well just to balance us out and slow us down. And we almost had a repeat of what happened on Ike, but fortunately we didn't, so everything is great and dandy. So just doing all the science. I'm gonna send out my dude in a minute. Do EVA reports. Plant a flag, because it's always nice to plant a flag and check where we're going and stuff. Collect surface samples and return into the rocket. Now it's just a case of flying us from the moon, so to speak. Got a little bit of fuel left in those side tanks, but the main rocket engine, plenty of Delta V in it, enough to get us back to the planet, in theory. Just, you know, throttling up, making our orbits as efficient as possible, because we're doing it right at the or right close to the apoapsis, that's the one. Silly me, I'm tired. So it's just a case of working out how far we need to go, how fast it is, all that kind of thing, and just getting ourselves a escape orbit from the Moon's gravity, and then going around to the periapsis and the apoapsis, and then closing in. You know, doing as much science as possible, collecting a couple of spare EVA reports while I still can, because I can collect as many of those as possible, so I'm going to be doing that as well as I can, really. Anyway, we're now in our Kerbal orbit. Find the correct location that we need to start thrusting in. Time warp over to there and thrust up so that we get our return. And from here on in, it's pretty boring because you've seen this all a million times. There we go. We've got our return orbit. May as well cut down all of our delta V. Well, horizontal movement anyway. You can still have a load of vertical movement, and I decide to fling that section off into space just because I got so much fuel left it doesn't really even matter. So that's shot off into space somewhere, but it will be crashing down into the planet. Sped up time so fast there that I almost crashed into the planet, and now it's just a case of landing this sucker, which you have seen many times before, and our parachute should do the job perfectly. And I'm just wasting all the RCS here because I can't dump it, and it helps us if we can slow it down and whatnot. And it makes the ship lighter, which means our parachutes are more effective. And there we go, we've landed that craft. So just gonna collect it and redeem all the science from it. So we got a ton of science from that. I think it was about 600 maybe, I don't know. And it's just a case of checking out all the other things. So now we are launching a new mission. We've got some probes attached to the side of the ship, as well as a strange lander with something underneath. I don't know how well you can see it there, but there we just ditched the solid rocket boosters. I've redesigned the tug just to have that bit more extra fuel, and it's not needed, but it's always handy having some additional more fuel. But anyway, yeah, that lander has got a strange payload underneath it, and you'll probably be wondering what it is. I don't know how high the quality is or whether you guys are watching it in full screen, but if you're watching it in full screen, you can probably tell that that is a rover, a rover, or a Roomba if you want to be that, pardon me, that way inclined. Anyway, it's just a case of we're going to be doing a standard insertion into a Kerbal orbit, keeping as much fuel as possible. On the last two rockets there, I like to have mainsail engines on it, just because they can get the bulk of the orbit maneuver done and then be ditched off right at the last moment, which is always really handy. It's not needed again, but it's always nice. So I'm just extracting all the solar panels there, and once again I'm going to sound like a broken record. We're going to be getting a target with the moon, or the mun, and there we go, pretty much done. Nice and simple. Flip around to the point that we need to go to and throttle up, or well, time warp up first and then throttle up, simple as. Again, it's only like between 600 and 800 delta V that we need to change our velocity by in order to get this encounter. So it's not that much tool in the grand scheme of things. And it's just a case of throttling and doing the stuff. Now, for this mission to really be successful, the two probes that I want to launch need to get into polar orbits. That way, they can go around the planet, collect as many different um, data points on the biomes around the planet, and the moon rather, and then the moon is also rotating around, so that as the moon slowly rotates, they're constantly mapping the same spot, and it basically, as the moon or the planet rotates, they get new data points underneath them, but they've technically stayed in the same point, kind of thing. If you get what I mean. If you look at it like a line, that will kind of be spinning around and doing all kinds of crazy things. And I'm probably explained that really badly, but you'll probably understand once you see it and whatnot. So I need to get those probes into two different orbit heights, really, around the poles. One of them needs to be in a near Kerbal orbit. The other needs to be in a high not Kerbal, Mun orbit. Sorry, my brain is scattered today. So I kind of want to get them to a point in a elliptical orbit. That way I can use the fuel on the probes to change them into their ideal circularized orbits. Now, really, I could have done that with one probe, but I think it's just nice using two probes to get it into the perfect orbit. So it's just a case of, again, repeating what we did last time to get into the poles. So, standard stuff. And then we can land our rover on the surface of the planet from this orbit height. So we get to this point, and I decide that it's going to be easy just to get the satellites done first, and then the rover done last. And of course, I can't ditch one satellite and then change orbit, because that will throw the balance of the ship, because of its center of mass being completely different and lopsided, which means that the thruster is now not balanced on the point of the center of mass, which means it will start flipping out, which is kind of annoying, but unfortunately we are not in a pure gravity-free zone, which means that this shit will happen. And I think it will still happen regardless of whether there's gravity there or not. I don't know. Can a physicist who actually knows this shit confirm that for me? If center of thrust is not on the center of mass in a gravity-free zone, will it still flip out? Anyway, that probe has been separated, and it's just a case of this is going to be the high orbit satellite. So got some tiny little Rockamax thrusters on there, and about fuel, toidial fuel tanks or whatever, and it's just a case of throttling up until we get a lovely circularized orbit. So I bicker about a little bit to circularize that orbit and rename it, and then it's just a case of it can use its gravity detectors to map out the gravity of the planet below, which shows the different densities of the rock, because in theory different densities have different gravities. The denser something is, the higher gravity it has. So you'll be able to tell kind of like a vague map of either rock type or where there's hollow areas, if there are hollow areas. Like if you've got a really sensitive gravity detector, then you could, in theory, use it to find where tunnels are and stuff. So yeah, just ditch the low orbit one, and I can't remember what orbit heights I had for this. I think I had 20k or roughly 20k and 200k thereabout. Either way, it checks the two different biome heights. So at a point off screen, I can just run this going around a couple of times and just collect the gravity data for all the different biomes. So now we go back to the main rocket, and it's a case of we can now just completely throttle off and land in the surface there. So I've still got a tiny bit left in that main fuel tank, so I can ditch as much of it as possible and then use the next fuel tank like so in a minute. And this is only a small stage for emergency corrections, and then we've got the landing stage as well left over. So I think at this point I'm going to employ the same tactics that I used last time of ditching that stage when we're heading nearly vertically down, so that I can use it to gauge where the height is. And so I just use up all the fuel for that stage and then manually activate all of the thrusters, because I just want to make sure that I have all the staging correct, because I don't want to accidentally ditch the stage for the rover and then have it crash into the planet and basically it will be useless. Anyway, I'll just move it over a little bit here, just so that we don't end up landing in one of the craters. And unfortunately, that does mean that we cannot use that section that we just ditched as a height reference. But you know what? I've done this plenty of times now, and it should be easy enough to do. So it's just a case of slowing down. We can see our shadow forming on the surface there, and it's just a case of slowing ourselves down and getting nearer and nearer to the surface and making sure that we land safe and sound, really, without damaging any of the rover. So there we go, touchdown, decouple that stage, and we can now ditch that. And I try and ditch it here, but realise that I need to dethrottle. Anyway, there we go, that is the first of 2 rovers deployed. This one's going to be focused on the Mun, and it's got all the science equipment on it, and we can repurpose this with a couple of parachutes to land on, well, other planets really. So there may be a couple of missions going to other planets soon, and hopefully that'll be nice and fun. Anyway, this is the 3rd and final mission of today's video, and once again it's pretty much doing exactly the same stuff as the previous mission, except this time we're going to Minmus, which means that doing some of the stuff is easier. We just need to spend a little bit more fuel getting out to the further reaches. Anyway, there goes our solid rocket boosters, and we're on to flying the rocket to Minmus. And with this rocket, it tends to spin around at the first stage for some reason, no idea why, but hey ho, not complaining, it does its job. Anyway, it's just a usual orbit insertion here. Lots of fuel, lots of flying, lots of big orange rocket tanks. You know, not really much more to say here. Just loads and loads of stuff to do. Now you see I had to live through this already once, so re-recording this again, this time with narration, it's like running out of what to say, because like I've already explained what I'm doing, and I've already done it twice really, well, once, and I've already explained this part millions and millions and millions of times, so you know, and there's probably people who can explain it a lot better than I can. Oh well. It's just a case of doing science, and science is fun. So, just making sure that we got ourselves on the right elevation for the for Minmus, because it is on an inclined orbit here. So this video shows lots of orbit inclinations, changes and whatnot. So you know, lots of things to do here and stuff. Anyway, yeah. Now we've just gotten ourselves into a fairly decent orbit location for Minmus, and we're just getting ourselves set up onto the node and releasing all of those delicious solar panels so that we don't run out of battery life, because this one does have significantly less, more so when we ditch the probe parts. Anyway, throttling up here to get our delicious encounter with the lovely ice cream flavored mint moon of Minmus, or rather, moon that is Minmus. Anyway, just need to do a bit of flim flam to get the orbit correct. And I just realised that it's easier to throttle up a little bit more and go a bit further out and then come back in, because it really doesn't take that much fuel. Anyway, we get to the point now where we can start perfecting our node a little bit, because I realised that we're going to be coming in on the wrong side of Minmus, which means that it's going to be really hard for us to slow down and stuff. Anyway, I just get ourselves into the perfect point, so to speak, as per, and then we can start slowing down once we get really close. Basically, I want to come in behind Minmus so that gravity tries to fling us around, and it kind of makes it easier for us to close the orbit, so to speak. Anyway, just getting our node sorted out so that we get into our lovely polar orbit that we need. And then it's just a case of time warping until we get to the point where we need to burn. And then in theory, because it's not that much delta V to worry about, we can just do it in one swift fellow swoop, which makes life lovely and easy. And then once we're at our apoapsis, we can bring it in and we can start releasing our probes and repeat the process that we did last time. So it's just a case of this time, because the moon is actually a significant size smaller, we're going to ditch one probe at about 15k height and the other probe at 150, which, you know, is a difference of 10 times. So, you know, we've got a broad range of data and we can map more of the gravity anomalies or potential gravity anomalies if there are any. We just don't know, and that's why we're doing this, for science. Anyway, we're ditching the probe that will go out into the further orbit first. You know, a bit longer that way, but it makes our life easier, because then we're not trying to do something immediately at that point. I'd rather give it time to drift away from the mothership and then get into its preferred orbit, rather than having to rush and do it all at one point. Anyway, here's a couple of seconds of me faffing around to get into our perfectly nearly circularized orbit. And here you see me getting ready to go into our second probe and get that into orbit, because we don't want our ship to flail about while it is completely off balance. So yeah, there we go. That's that probe in orbit, and I just faff a little bit just to get it perfectly circularized, or nearly perfectly circularized. With these probes, I've got them basically within about a 300-meter discrepancy of apoapsis and periapsis height, which is why you can see the node markers shaking, especially when I'm rotating about, which is always a good sign that you've got a nearly perfect circular orbit. Unfortunately, it's never going to be 100% perfect, but you know, sometimes you just basically say, yeah, close enough, mate. So I set up a maneuver node, then I realized that I'm going the wrong way around the planet for that maneuver node, and I would basically crash into it on the other side. I want to be landing on the light side of the planet just because it makes life so much easier if I am. You know. Anyway, I'm coming straight down here, and it's just a case of, you know, preparing to do all the fun, and then I realised, nah, I don't want to go there. That's way too near the poles. I want to land myself on one of the ice flats, because, you know, the ice flats actually make life so much easier to use rovers on, because they're nice, smooth, you got a lovely flat surface, and it's actually two biomes once you get to the edges, so you know, actually really cool. So I just, you know, prepare myself, make sure that I get well into the ice flats, and then it's just a case of cutting down all of my horizontal velocity, and I decided to ditch that stage because, you know, didn't really need it, and I don't want to be landing on that thing because that will destroy the rover if I do land on it. So I ditched that stage and used the landing stage to bring us down. Again, I used that tactic of using it to tell what height things are at, but fortunately, landing here, it's all at sea level, which makes it very easy to gauge on the height marker. And we slowly touch down, nice and smooth, and I just refill that one tank of monopropellant up because I forgot to do it last time, and then I just throttle away and set up that probe for doing all of its science. So these two probes that I've set up now, they can do all kinds of science and just chart around the planet and go to different biomes if I can be bothered to move them. It would be nice to, you know, set up automated routes and waypoints for them to go to, but, you know, can't be bothered and whatnot. You know, no biggie. And here you can see the crash of the landing pod, and that's all for you guys. See ya!